Hey, Eagles fans, this is Chris Franklin here alongside Bob Brookover and Cayden Steele, and we felt we needed to do an emergency podcast for a major trade that the Eagles have executed on this we're recording on a Thursday morning. And to give you guys a programming update, we have a full podcast that we actually recorded before this news came out, but you'll be able to hear it later on this afternoon. But it's an important one, we felt like, because the Eagles look like they added another piece to their offense, executing a trade with the Commanders, which I think is kind of funny because Commanders general manager Adam Peters jokingly talked about Howie Roseman in a trade, calling him excuse my language, a pain in the ass to try to do a deal with him. But we have a second one within a few months with the Eagles getting Commanders wide receiver Jahan Dotson and a 2025 fifth round pick. In exchange, they sent a third round pick and 2 7th-round picks in 2025 to the Commanders. And we look at the impact that this trade is going to have. It's a domino effect, not only in terms of this offense, what we see here, but also in terms of the future of this division and also the outlook of what the Eagles have this season. I want to bring in right now Bob and Cayden. Guys, I know we just finished recording the first one. So how have you guys done in the last about an hour?
I wrote an emergency story.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, we're going to make this tight and quick, but we're going to give you as much information as we possibly can as well, too, on this. I'm going to get your reaction. I'll start with you, Bob. What's your initial thoughts on this trade, and what do you think the Eagles' outlook is for this offense now?
Well, it's funny because I was talking with some other guys on the beat yesterday. I was like, the Eagles wide receiving core is really good at the top, but it's thin. And I'd watched the Giants over the weekend. I've been doing some Giants coverage. Like, depth-wise, they might be better. Well, right now, after this deal, talent-wise and depth-wise, the Eagles wide receiving core is good as or better than any team in the NFL. It's just another weapon for Jalen Hurts. I mean, he's got, I don't know, they have enough footballs. This is a guy who scored 11 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. He was a first-round pick. They've got no excuse not to be a great offense now. I mean, this is you look at the depth that the team that comes to mind right away for me is the 49ers, because they didn't have that great guy with a burst out numbers, but they just had so many different ways they could kill you in turn. I'm just talking about receiver. Christian McCaffrey's obviously a guy who could kill you. And they just so many guys, so many weapons last year. And now the Eagles have the same thing, from top to bottom on that offense. There's no excuse for them not to be a great offense.
Yeah, you're getting with Jahan Dotson last season with the Commanders, 49 catches for 518 yards and 4 touchdowns. Cayden, what impact do you think he's going to have on his offense? And Bob mentioned this earlier in terms of they don't have enough footballs. Do you think it's going to be a problem having another weapon like this added into it?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be a problem. Having too many good guys is a problem that you can solve later when you're figuring out who gets the football. And I guess to start off with that, AJ and Devontae are still going to get the majority of the targets. I don't know if they view Dotson as a guy that you mentioned the stat line last year, which is, a solid stat line, but I'm not sure if he's going to be a guy that's super high volume, which is fine, but I do think he adds an element of speed, of route running, of versatility that will really impact the wide receiver core, open up things more for Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. It would open up things generally for the offense. I mean, Kellen Moore's talked about moving wide receivers around. We've seen Devontae move in the slot. I mean, Dotson is a guy that can play on the outside too. You can move him in the slot. Now you have so many different guys that don't just have to play one wide receiver position, either at the X or in the slot. Now they can do many different things. So it opens that up. And then you got Dallas Goedert. Now they have so many different pass catchers now. And then, which is good news for Jalen Hurts and good news for Kellen Moore, that they're going to be able to do so many different things within the scheme this year that they were capable of doing last season. Last year, they didn't really even have that wide receiver 3 with Quez Watkins and Olamide Zaccheaus. They just didn't have a guy that had a ton of potential there. And look, I get things didn't work out in Washington, and it's a slightly weird move that makes you have to pause a little bit why a team would trade a guy in division like that. And that's what's raising my eyebrows a little bit. But at the same time, we've seen Jahan Dotson have success in this league, even though it's not maybe first round, living up to that first round status. But yeah, it looks like a move that could really pay off. And Bob said maybe like the 49ers could have just an elite group of 3 wide receivers.
Yeah, it is very weird to see an intra-division trade and 2 that's happened in such a small period of time. And we know that obviously with a trade like this, we obviously know that Dotson's making this roster. If he was cut right there for you, like, what the heck is going on? So we know that's down the depth chart. There's going to be somebody who's going to be affected. And we looked at that 3rd wide receiver position, that battle that was going on through camp. Paris Campbell, John Ross, Britton Covey, Johnny Wilson. 3 of the 4 have missed time now, considering for injuries. Paris Campbell was dealing with, I believe it was a groin, if I were, or a hamstring, something like that, a lower body one, a soft tissue injury. Groin. Appreciate it. Thank you. And then when you look at John Ross and Johnny Wilson, they've still been in concussion protocol. So something had to be done. You're missing valuable reps in terms of that in there. But when you look at this, I'll go to Cayden and then I'll go to you, Bob, after that. Cayden, in terms of who do you think will be impacted in the overall wide receiver thing, who's the odd man out in this group now?
Yeah, the odd man out that comes to my mind first, just from terms of not making the roster, is Paris Campbell. I don't see a world where he's on this team week 1. The reason that even maybe throughout this week I thought he still had a shot despite the groin injury and missing the first 2 preseason games was because of the lack of experience that they had behind Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Britton Covey has never really played on offense. Johnny Wilson's a rookie. Anais Smith has struggled. John Ross is coming back from football for the first time in 2 years and playing the regular season. I really never believed that was going to happen. So Campbell, by default, seemed like a guy that was always going to find his way maybe onto the roster, even though he's been hurt and hasn't played that well during training camp. But with the addition of Jahan Dotson, a guy who's not only young but also decently proven in this league, there's no room for Paris Campbell anymore on this roster. And when it comes to a role, I mean, Johnny Wilson and Britton Covey and Kellen Moore talked about in training camp how he's going to deploy all different types of wide receivers into the slot, and he can use a different combination. I don't think that's necessary anymore with the addition of Jahan Dotson. Maybe those guys play a little bit once in a while, but Britton Covey, even though he's had a nice camp, will probably go back to his punt returning role, and Johnny Wilson will get a chance to develop without having to take on a big role, which is probably better for his career going forward.
What do you think, Bob? Who do you think is going to be the odd man out in this group?
Yeah, I think it could also be Paris Campbell. It was interesting because Paris Campbell came back from the groin. He was running with the ones a lot yesterday during practice. You were out there, Chris, and you saw it. He was the intended receiver on Jalen Hurts' first pick at camp. So he is a guy who definitely could be impacted. I mean, one thing we see here, I just popped in my head here, is maybe they try to keep one of these younger guys now and put them with the thought of having them in a more of a developmental role. And when I say young guys, Jacob Harrison, Joseph Nagata are in that mix. Now you don't have to necessarily have a veteran guy on the roster that you feel more comfortable with getting on the field, because now, as Cayden alluded to, the 3 guys who are going to be on the field almost all the time are going to be A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Jahan Dotson. So, that changes the equation that way. But the guy who is probably the most bummed and most impacted by this is Britton Covey, who seemed to, in Paris Campbell's absence, really, felt like he had become that slot guy and had been having a terrific camp, and will still probably get a few chances here and there. But like the impact where he becomes the prototypical small guy, gets open in space for a first down role that he may have envisioned for himself, probably is no longer there for Britton Covey, and he's going to have to go back to being a dynamic punt returner, which he was last season. But I'm sure he said he wants to be more. I had a long talk with him after last week's game against the Patriots, and so he may have to settle for less of a role than he was hoping for.
Now we know Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, loves to use 11 personnel. I mean, a lot of teams around the league love 11 personnel, which means one running back, one tight end, 3 wide receivers. So here's the Eagles' projected start, and he uses the first down a lot. So here's the projected starters in an 11 personnel set that we could see. You have Saquon Barkley at running back. You have wide receivers. You have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and now Jahan Dotson. And your tight end is Dallas Goedert. And when you compare this around the league now, you look at teams like the 49ers. You look at the Chiefs. You look at I think the Detroit Lions are still a formidable offense. And now you have the Eagles. Where do you guys rank? I'll start with you, Bob, on this. Where do the Eagles rank in terms of offensive firepower? And is there any excuse why this team shouldn't even be top 2 after this move today?
Yeah, I mean, the 49ers is the only one that really comes to me. The Lions, the depth of the Lions and great at tight end. The Lions and 49ers are the 2 teams, maybe the Dolphins, but throw a ball in the air and any one of them is great, but it could come down to the quarterback play to say who's number 1 in that group. But the Eagles are in the conversation. I'll say that they're definitely in the conversation. And you don't have to be number 1. You just have to be really dynamic. And they're one of the top 3 offensive teams talent wise. The thing about the thing that you go back to also is the offensive line. The Eagles, by many accounts, have been one of the top offensive lines and top 5 offensive lines for many years now. The Lions also have a really good one, and of those teams we mentioned that the Lions and Eagles are better than the 49ers in that regard, but they're one of the top 3 offenses in football. It doesn't matter whether you're 1, 2, 3. You should have firepower to score and be one of the top teams in the league.
I'll make this a final question here as part of our podcast, right? The emergency podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening into this emergency session that we're doing on the Jahan Dotson trade that the Eagles made with the Washington Commanders. Cayden, these moves like today's move, do you think that the Eagles have significantly increased their chances to win the Super Bowl? Do you think that this is the type of move that's just like, okay, they were already there? Or do you think this is like, do you think more has to be done to give them a better shot? Or is this, I'm just making too much, like I'm putting way too much into this. Where do you think this does? What do you think this does for their chances to win a Super Bowl?
Yeah. I mean, you win Super Bowls in this league. Yes. Sometimes great defenses do it. And, that is true, but even with the upgrades they've made on this defense this year, I don't know if they'll necessarily be great. So the way this team wins the Super Bowl is by being, like you mentioned, Chris, a top 2 offense. That's how they get it done, by having a average to good defense and having an elite offense. And this move puts you in that position. From an individual perspective, I'm not sure if Dotson is a guy that necessarily elevates an offense. He certainly didn't do that in Washington, but you got to take context into this situation. Like, didn't play with good quarterbacks. Played with Sam Howell last year. There's a reason that he didn't produce as much. It isn't just because of him. That entire thing was a mess last year. It didn't work out for him in Washington right now. Something must have happened there where they felt like they both needed a fresh start. But as a wide receiver 3, and the pressure's not on him as much, and he can do a lot of different things. So it opens the door even for a longer run, I think, even if you think about it from a long-term perspective, because he's got 2 years left on his deal. You could opt in for the 5th year if they really wanted to. You could have Dotson, Smith, and Brown together for 3 more seasons at least. And with Dallas Goedert, I mean, you'll have him at least for 2 more years. And then Saquon is on a 3-year deal. So you have all these offensive pieces in place. There's no reason you shouldn't be a top 2 offense this year, but a top 2 offense for another 2 or 3 years. So this opens the Super Bowl window this year and beyond. And I think it's a really smart move and one that's going to elevate everything.
All right, well said. Well, guys, thank you very much for hopping back on and doing this. We'll continue to have continuing coverage of this latest trade that the Eagles made for Jahan Dotson on NJ.com. And just make sure NJ.com/Eagles and watch that. We'll also have other stuff in terms of the upcoming preseason game coming up with the Minnesota Vikings. You'll also hear that on the No-Huddle Show, the regular show that we normally do, that will come out later this afternoon. So for Bob and Cayden, I'm Chris. Everybody have a good one. See ya.